guidance to Claude Code when working with code in this repository. This is a premium marketing website for LeftClick. It's an AI automation agency targeting B2B companies. Here's how to deploy it to Netlify. Here's the architecture. Here's the design system. Here's the Netlify config, etc. Why is this valuable? I mean, like, it technically has access to all this information anyway, right? So, like, why are we getting it to summarize it all? Well, we're getting it to summarize it all because one thing we're going to talk a lot about in this course is context management. And that basically just means all of the tokens currently in a prompt. As you've seen, there are multiple levels to this, right? There's like the global Claude.md, that's injected. Then there's the local Claude.md, that's injected. There's the enterprise level Claude.md, that's injected. We're then going to talk a lot more about the tool calls and various tool definitions. Those are all injected. And then finally, at the very end of it, you actually have your own prompt that you're sending, which is also part of the context. Well, if in addition to that, you force Claude to read through every single file every time that you initialize to know what the hell you're talking about, obviously you have to add significantly more tokens to any prompt, right? And by doing so, a couple things happen. One, the quality of Claude on average will go down because there's a negative relationship between the length of the prompt and then the quality of Claude's outputs. That's just sort of the way that it works statistically with these models. But two, you're also paying way more because now instead of consuming, let's say 10,000 tokens at a time, you're consuming 100,000 because this thing had to read through your contact.html, had to read your index.html, had to read your message.md, it had to read everything. And so Claude.md, if you think about it, in addition to providing high-level instructions and some guidance and steering of the ship, also is a mechanism by which you can significantly reduce your token usage and then increase the average quality of Claude because it'll just know everything, especially when you use \init like I just showed you a moment ago, before actually having to read through the files. It'll know that index.html uses an inverted light color scheme, okay? It'll know that, there's a contact.html, which is a contact page. It'll know how it's hosted. It's not going to have to do a bunch of API calls to various services to figure this out. It just already knows all this stuff because that's what the /init just did. So if you don't already have a Claude.md, I'd highly recommend go into your folder, generate one. Once you have it generated, then you can continue making additions and changes as necessary. But literally just having a description of the way that the folder works is honestly, the 90% of the battle. So for simplicity, I've compiled the top recommendations into a quick do and don'ts guide for you. The first thing to do is just run \init first anytime you're working in a new folder. The second is I just use bullet points and short headings. Try and compress information as much as possible. Basically write in a high information density style. Don't just voice transcript dump into your Claude.md. If you wanted to write a Claude.md, for instance, using AS help, I might actually voice dump into Claude and then say, turn this into a very high information density summary of rules and stuff. Put the most important things at the top. If there's anything that it absolutely shouldn't do, like never delete XYZ file or whatever, mention it up at the very top. The first few things that AI learns, it tends to remember. It's sort of like the middle gap of the prompt. If I were to show you guys what this actually looks like, basically it goes like this. It remembers a lot of the beginning. It doesn't really remember much of the middle, and then it's more likely to remember some of the end. So this is called your primacy bias. Human beings are like this too, which is really interesting. And then this is called your recency bias, which means, Claude and us are biased towards remembering things at the very beginning of a stretch and then the end of the stretch. But more so the beginning, which is why you put very important guardrails at the top. Periodically review and prune this, treat it like living code. If you have Claude constantly update the Claude.md, you will find over time it adds things that aren't really super necessary, some super precise instructions. It starts changing sort of the way that it talks to you and stuff. So I treat it sort of like technical debt and then I reduce it over time. What not to do is don't dump entire style guides and API docs into it. This is an unfortunate habit that I've seen a lot of people do where they basically are like, oh, I want this to be my, I don't know, let's just say a PandaDoc companion. So they go to the PandaDoc API and then they download the entire thing and then they try and paste it into the Claude.md. It ends up being 10,000 tokens. And then keep in mind, this is initialized every single time you run Claude code, right? In addition to it taking a little bit longer because now you have that initialization time, it's also just a pain in the ass and it's more costly while reducing Claude's quality as mentioned. So don't do that. Instead, talk to Claude, say, okay, what specific API endpoints are we going to need? And then give it the whole API and then just have it prune it down to just the specific sections that you need or specific, maybe high-level instructions on how to use this API that maybe is not super relevant or trivial, I should say. Claude.md allows you to do what's called an @include. This is very simple to just, I didn't want to spend too much time on this, but basically if in your Claude.md, you just say, @get git.md, and you have a folder called git.md somewhere else in your computer, it'll actually go and it'll like include that into the Claude.md. As you guys can see, that functionality is sort of taken care of by rules, but just don't include a bunch of files unless absolutely necessary. Don't write really vague rules in general, like treat Claude like, really intelligent savant style intelligence, but also, people they tend to be really intelligent, and savants, like, really intelligent in one specific little slice of the field. If you give them too much rope, they'll just hang themselves. So try not to write like really high level, vague, aspirational things unless absolutely necessary, unless it makes sense. For instance, don't just say, be smart. Don't say, make no mistakes. Claude's not going to understand that, right? I keep seeing a meme rolling around Twitter, and it's like, Claude, make me $1 million. Don't make any mistakes. And it's like, it's just that's not gonna improve the quality of its output or anything like that. In general, you want to keep it somewhere between like 200 to maybe 500 lines or so max. The recommendation is not to go any longer than 500 lines. Otherwise, again, you're just dumping in a ton of context. And then don't forget to add rules when Claude keeps making the same mistake. So like if you're working with a particular library or particular software platform, or again, a particular API like Pandadoc or whatever, and they have a very specific way of going about things, every time you load up a fresh instance of Claude Code, it's going to continuously make that mistake, which is going to cost you again in tokens, but then also in context because of quality. So if you find that it makes a mistake more than 2 or 3 times, tell it, hey, I want you to add this to your Claude.md so that this would work the next time I run it on a fresh instance of Claude. That's one of my favorite things to tell it. Okay, so these are just some high-level rules. Obviously, there are more. If you want like a really powerful way of finding solid Claude code tips, and specifically like Claude.md stuff, I actually go straight over to Twitter/X, and then I say, compile the last month of high ROI Claude.md writings. What are the best things to include? Because this technology moves so quickly, rather than me, trying to like tell you guys to always include a certain snippet of text in your Claude.md, basically I just have it go through the last month of Twitter posts. After a moment, it'll tell you the most useful high ROI insights and patterns. Grok obviously is X's model. They have access to all Twitter posts. And there's some extraordinarily intelligent people on here that basically live inside of Claude Code. So I get most of like my advanced tips from them. And yeah, there's a lot of instructions and advice here given in just the last month or so. Okay, now that we've talked about the Claude.md, let's talk about a few additional features that not a lot of people understand they have access to inside of Claude Code. The first is this concept of auto memory. So basically, in addition to the Claude.md, there's an additional tiny little file that's injected at the top of every session. And you'll find that Anthropic and the developers of Claude Code do a lot of these injections. It's not just the Claude.md, and it's not just this memory file, which I'll talk about. They have a lot. Tool calls, definitions, lots of stuff. So the way that memory works, basically, is if you tell Claude something in one instance, and then you tell it to remember it, it'll actually write it to this memory file. And then in another instance, when you pull it up, this is like a global memory file, it'll remember you. So if I open up Claude Code again, and down here I say, I don't know, what's my brother's name? So try and ask it some, let's say, personal information that I want it to find out for me. It'll say, I don't know your brother's name. You haven't shared that with me. I say, remember that my brother's name is George. Now, what it's going to do is it'll save that to its memory file, okay, which already has a few other things, like the fact that my dog's name is Yelpers. You guys think my dog's name's Yelpers? Then if I go to a new fresh Claude Code instance and then I say, what's my brother's name? Notice how this time we're not going to have that issue. It's just going to say George. And the reason why, if we just go back to this very stereotypical, prototypical example, which just continues to grow, in addition to both the enterprise Claude.md, the global Claude.md, and then the local Claude.md, you also have a file here which is separate from all of those, called memory.md. And Claude will inject this at the very top of basically every new session. So in addition to, again, this global section here, and then this local section, we also have a memory, and then we have a bunch of other tool call definitions and stuff like that, which I'll talk a little bit about later. In practice, memory isn't super valuable or anything like that. I mean, Claude.md does a lot of that, of course, but it's separate from Claude.md. You can kind of treat this as Claude's own notes. It's not really your instruction set. Okay, next up are agents. As you see here, we have this agent subfolder within the .claude local settings folder. This can be pretty difficult to understand, so I'm just going to give you a high-level overview now, and then we're actually going to do a lot more agent development later on in the course. But let's just say I want an agent called tell me the time.md. And this is a really simple agent. I basically just want it to tell me the current time. I can define the tools that it has access to, the model, the max number of turns that I can have it autonomously go and fulfill my request, whether I want it to have global or local memory. I can give it a little description, a name, and then also down here, just like a brief little outline of what it is that I want to do. And so in this case, hypothetically, I'm just saying this is a time teller. I basically want my big agent to talk to my smaller agent and then say, hey, what's the time? Very simple and straightforward. So I'm actually going to open up a new session here, and I'm going to say, what time is it? Use my agent. And if you haven't already seen, the sub-agent tool call looks a little bit different from what you guys are probably used to. Notice how now we're opening up this task called tell me the current time. And what happened is we see this little in input. What this is our main agent talking to a sub-agent. And so this main agent basically said, I see that Nick said, what time is it? And he asked me to use my agent. Let me check all of my available agents. It then went through the agents folder, found that there was an agent called tellmethetime.md, and then said, oh, I see, there's an agent here that can tell me the time. Since Nick asked me for that, this is obviously the one that he wants me to use. It then creates a task called tell me the current time, and then sends the new agent a message saying, hey, Nick wants to know the current time. Please determine the current time and report it back. Then at the very end, it says the current time is 2:23 p.m. MT. Anything else the agent wanted you to tell me? Yes, it greeted you with a howdy partner, and then it gave me a little cute cowboy emoji. The reason for that, obviously, is because down here, I said also say howdy partner. And so you can have agents for a million different things. In general, one-off functions like tell me the time aren't really that valuable because, your parent agent can sort of already tell you the time for the most part. But there are a couple of agents that do make sense. And so if we split this into parent and then the variety of different ways you could call this. It used to be master slave, by the way, which, had a bunch of issues. They had to change it. Now it's kind of like parent agent and then child agent. But if you think about it, there are a few agents that actually make sense. The first agent that makes sense is, in general, having some sort of research subagent. The reason why is because the way that agents work is they're spawned with their own context. And so this agent down here that we just spawned has no context aside from just this input. It literally, the only text inside of its prompt is the user wants to know the current time. Please determine the current time along with, the high level instructions that we defined and tell me the time. That's literally all that it has. That's its whole Claude.md essentially. And so because of the separation of context, if you want to keep the total number of tokens that you use as low as possible in the parent agent, which is usually the smartest one, like the one that you're paying the big API token usage and stuff like that for, instead of trying to fill in 100,000 tokens of research when it goes on the internet and it looks up trends, and then it goes, checks out Google Analytics, and then it goes, pumps things into, DuckDuckGo. Instead of filling or polluting all the context of the parent agent, what you do is you basically just say, hey, go research XYZ and tell me a summary. And then it will go pollute all of its own context window, get it super long, might use 50 or 100,000 tokens, which is why a lot of people use the Sonnet model series at the time of this recording for that purpose. And then the only thing that actually makes it back to the parent is just that summary. So down here, this could use 100,000 tokens, right? But then the tokens that it transmits back might only be, 2K or something, which is, if you think about it, a cost savings amount of 50 times. We're literally 50 times cheaper than whatever the parent cost would have been. And then we also get to use, a lot of cheaper sub-models and stuff like that, like Sonnet, like Haiku, and so on and so forth. So research is really, really good. And that's one sub-agent that I would almost always create. I'm actually going to show you guys how to create one later for your code and then also for other automation purposes. Another one that I really recommend is basically having a reviewer agent. The way that the reviewer agent works is, in contrast with the research agent, it having no context is actually the whole point. So basically what happens is this parent writes a bunch of code, right? It's like your index.html, or as we're going to see, it's going to be Python scripts or whatever the heck. It's just going to do a bunch of code for you. And then after writing all that code,